recording? All right, so now we are recording this webinar for posterity and for folks who may not be able to join us today to be able to listen and watch later. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this webinar over to our amazing presenter for today, Erin McDowell, PWN USA's Communications Consultant. Thank you so much, Erin, and thanks everyone for being here.
All right. I'm very excited to talk to you all today about blogging, and I hope you get a lot out of this webinar. So first, we're going to just quickly review some learning objectives of things that you should come out on the other side of this webinar having gained some knowledge and insight about. So to learn why and how blogging can help you to further your advocacy work, understand the ins and outs of blogging. So we're going to talk about a lot of the basics and 101s to blogging. Learn how to create engaging content, which is obviously one of the most important and critical pieces to being an effective blogger. And understanding how to establish yourself as a blogger and using your blog as a platform, which is kind of for those who maybe are a little bit more advanced in blogging, have done it before, and want to really use it in the most strategic ways possible. Next slide, please. All right, so to get started, here is a little bit of my background. As Olivia said, I am currently the communications consultant for PWN USA, and I also have a pretty extensive background working in communications and also doing a lot of writing and blogging myself, especially for nonprofit and grassroots organizations, many of which are listed in the biography on the slide. I also do a lot of my own blogging. Personally, I mainly blog on Tumblr. Fearless Feminism is my main blog, and that is Tumblr-based. And I also do a lot of blogging and writing for popular news and editorial websites like the Huffington Post and RH Reality Check, and some of the other organizations and websites I'm currently working for are YTH, stands for Youth Tech and Health, Bustle, and there are several others. And I also have done a lot of speaking. One of the biggest conferences I've spoken at is the National Sexual Assault Conference in 2014, and I'm also on the RAIN Speakers Bureau. So that's just a little bit to give you some insight as to where I'm coming from and a little bit of info as to my experiences with blogging. Next slide. So first we're going to go over some of the 101s of blogging and the things you really need to know to get started, and especially for those of you who maybe have never blogged before, this should really be helpful and give you the tools to get started. Next slide. So first of all, what is blogging? So by the dictionary, blogging is defined as, quote, a website containing a writer's or a group of writers' own experiences, observations, opinions, etc., and often having images and links to other websites. I actually thought this was a pretty concise and accurate definition. Blogging is definitely a very personal experience, and a lot of blogs come off of storytelling and really sharing your own insight and experience. And this can even be in a way that is news-oriented or based on current events or advocacy, right? But a lot of times has a personal angle to it in some way, and definitely like links to a lot of the other places in the cyber world, and is a part of this kind of interconnectedness that we're seeing online. So it's really just about taking your experiences and perspectives and putting them on to the screen, so to speak, like instead of pen to paper. And this can really look a variety of different ways, and we're going to talk about some of the different forms of blogging that you can do. Next slide. So why blog, especially as an advocate? Well, as the little infographic on this slide shows, the sites that have blogs actually have 55% more visitors, get 67% more leads, so more people linking back to that website, and then also themselves feature 97% more inbound links. So it's a really great way to get connected online and to really get your website, organization, or even yourself really into the internet stratosphere. And as an advocate especially, blogging can be a really great way to expand your reach and to reach more people than you maybe can offline, since the power of the internet allows your words to reach people around the world and to get you in touch with people who you may not otherwise have a chance to connect with outside of the people that you know locally or the people that you talk to in person and in real time. So it's a really great way to share your messages and perspectives that's basically limitless. And with that, I think definitely storytelling and sharing is where this power of connection really comes in, and it's where the real power behind blogging is, because people really connect to sharing stories and to experiences, because we all see statistics and information, and it can definitely be powerful, but I don't think it has the same kind of pull on people that sharing a story around an issue does. And so it's really valuable in really being able to share your story and having an avenue in which to do that. And, even in terms of having skills as a professional and even as an advocate who might want to take their work to the next level, blogging is a really great skill to have, and it can really take you far in terms of your online work and presence. And even with that, taking your work online, it's definitely a great thing to have avenues of advocacy in person and online, and making those connections in person even last longer, by referring people to your blog and, sharing a story with someone in person, but then saying that, if they want to follow up and learn more about you and about this issue, they can visit your blog or even contribute to your blog. And it's a great way to kind of take those connections that we have in person and then amplify them even more on the internet. Next slide. So if you're developing your own blog, here are some best practices in really how to get started and in creating something that is going to be sustainable as well as be attractive to potential visitors and viewers and followers. So first of all, developing your own authentic voice. This is something that is really important. You definitely want to be yourself in blogging, and you want to showcase your personality and really be who you are. And it sometimes can seem like you might want to base your ideas off of other people who have been really successful and done similar things, but really their power comes out of their own authenticity. And all of us have really amazing qualities and aspects to ourselves that people will really gravitate to. And so figuring out what those are and really developing your voice is really important. And that can be in the way that you write. It can be an informal way of writing or a more formalized style of writing. It can even be in the length and content of your posts. You might be someone who is better doing a lot of shorter posts, or you might have a lot to say, and people might really enjoy the depth of your analysis. So really just figuring out what aspects of your personality really shine and really focusing on those. And then, of course, having consistent content and being reliable to your readers is something that's also really important, because if people come to expect things from you, and if you don't deliver it according to what they are expecting to see, a lot of times people will get bored or just not really look further into what you're doing. And so definitely I think having some kind of consistency and figuring out what that means for you is important. And then also, being honest with yourself about how much you can give to blogging, because I think it's really easy to say, like, I'm going to write one blog post every single week and I am going to do it and it's going to be awesome, but then you don't realize how much work actually goes into it, and then you find yourself stressing out about it. And so I think definitely not doing it just to meet deadlines, but figuring out what works for you and then just establishing that kind of as a pattern. And then people will tend to kind of just follow suit. And then with that, creating a posting schedule. So typically, even if it's an unofficial posting schedule, having some sort of routine that you go through, whether that's posting once per week, whether you post about every 2 weeks, people come to expect certain things, and it even keeps you accountable and really keeps the blog consistent in terms of how much you're putting things out there. And then finally, brand messaging, having a really strong and consistent brand message, which can be complicated and difficult, but really just, I think, comes down to using your unique voice and perspectives and sticking to that. And even, just doing things like having a logo and then just using that everywhere and using that on your social media and et cetera. So just making sure that you're using the same things over and over again so that your audience knows who you are. Next slide. So now we're going to talk a little bit about blogging yourself versus blogging for another outlet, because there's definitely differences and there's definitely, I think, benefits and disadvantages to doing both. So benefits of having your own blog are that you get to control the content. You don't have to go through anyone else to publish things. You can also receive accolades for your work. Many people who blog receive all kinds of honors and awards and even opportunities for speaking and for writing for other publications. So you kind of get more of an opportunity for acknowledgement. You can also write whenever you want to and don't have to worry about doing things like pitching, which is often necessary when you're blogging for another outlet. So you're really in control when you're the one who is doing the blogging and having your own platform. Now, the disadvantages of that are that it can be very time-consuming when you're the one who's in charge and doing everything. It definitely takes a lot more time and effort, so you definitely have to see if that's something that you can do or not. And if time is an issue, I would definitely say you probably should consider blogging for other outlets, just because there definitely is a lot of time and sweat equity, especially in establishing a blog that has to go into it. It can definitely be hard to get off the ground. So at first, building that audience and doing all of that definitely takes more work and can take you essentially being your own marketing person and doing your own PR and writing the blog posts and being your tech person. So you just kind of have to do a lot in order to really get yourself far, and that's, I think, where a lot of people end up giving up is because, they're not seeing, super immediate results. And then finally, the expectation of organizing or writing often. You definitely have to be able and willing to put content out there. So if you're somebody who's a little bit more sporadic with your writing, again, that could be a disadvantage that could indicate that having your own blog might not be the best for you. Now, in terms of benefits for writing for another outlet, it's definitely a lower level of commitment, since a lot of times you can just write one guest piece and that's all you're committing to. So you don't have to put the same amount of time and commitment and strategy into writing for another blog. You could also access a new audience. Many bloggers will actually write guest posts on other bloggers' websites, because then they have the opportunity to speak to that blogger's audience and potentially get those followers and readers over to their website. So you definitely can access a new demographic and group of people through blogging for other outlets. And finally, you definitely have more exposure and definitely unique exposure, since you're reaching people who you probably wouldn't necessarily reach otherwise. And because other blogs are already established platforms in most cases, and sometimes with tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of readers, you can really take advantage of that, and you don't have to build the readership yourself. The reader's already there, so you just have to do the writing. Now, the disadvantages of blogging for another outlet are that you don't have editorial control. So obviously, sometimes in terms of editing your content, or even in terms of what you can say, what you can't say, style-wise, you're going to have to follow somebody else's rules, and some platforms are more strict than others, so this is something to keep in mind. And then also you usually have to pitch and find some kind of an in, so you have to spend some time either writing your pitch or finding editors to connect with, etc. So it definitely can take some work in terms of finding a place to publish your work. Next slide. So this is just going to be an overview as to the types of blogging that exist, because there's definitely more than one way to blog. And we're also going to go over a little bit later some more in-depth examples of all of these. So first we have microblogging, i.e. Tumblr. And I know I mentioned I'm a big fan of Tumblr and microblogging, because essentially with microblogging you get the same blogging experience, and you can feel free to blog on your own as much as you want to, but you also have the opportunity to share other pieces of content, and they are sort of reflected as your own. As on Tumblr, when you reblog something, it shows up on your own blog. So you can share content in kind of a unique way, and also not necessarily have to produce content in the same way as often as you would on more traditional blogging sites. Then photo sharing and photojournalism. So there's many image-based campaigns, even like infographics, that sort of work as blog posts. Things like that, really anything that's using visual media in order to really share a message or a perspective. And those can be very powerful since people, especially online, really connect to images. Reporting, so this is a little bit more in a traditional journalistic style of blogging, so taking some kind of a current event or issue and talking about it with maybe a personal angle, or in a way that's a little bit more like bite-sized and easy for the average reader to understand, who may not be as integrated and knowledgeable about said issue as you are. Video blogging, so something like making YouTube videos, for example. This has become very popular, and if you're somebody who has a very charismatic personality, you love to speak in public, and even if you're not necessarily the best writer, but you just really love to be able to speak and have that connection to others, it can be a really great way to blog, because people are seeing you and connecting with you in a video style format, and it's definitely a really cool avenue, especially I think with advocacy. And finally, op-eds. So this is kind of the most common form of blogging and what we usually think of with blogs. So basically some kind of a post that has a personal perspective and opinion attached to it about an issue. Next slide. All right, so now we're going to talk about just some foundations, and these are things to keep in mind when you're forming your blog and thinking about how you're going to go about blogging, especially if you work as an advocate and for an organization. So what are your communications goals? So you want to be thinking about what your overall goals are for connecting to people, and how is a blog going to help you to do this, and how can you do it in a unique way through blogging? How does blogging play into this? So how does it play into your communications goals? Does it make sense with your current communications goals to start blogging? How to communicate what our groups do. So that's definitely very important, I think, if you're blogging from an organizational perspective. You want to be able to give insight and clarity into what you're doing, and also, give your audience a chance to connect with you on the level of the work that you're doing. What are some of our group barriers? There's definitely always challenges to blogging, so you definitely want to think about what disadvantages there are and what things are kind of standing in your way, whether that's time, whether that's having people to write, etc. who is on our team. So you want to figure out who is doing what. Are you a solo team? Do you have a group of writers? Who is really going to be on that core team, and how are you going to drive the ship? And finally, what are our team members doing? So you want to figure out really who's doing what and in what capacity it makes sense. Because for some blogs, it makes sense to have it be set up a little bit more like an online magazine where you have editors and such. And for some, you just have one writer and that's it. So figuring out what people are doing and what their roles are before you start is definitely really important and things that you want to keep in mind. Next slide. So if you want to get started right now, these are kind of the bare bones things to keep in mind and that you'll have to do. So if you're starting your own blog, mind you. So first is choosing a name and a website URL. This is definitely an important step because you want it to be something that makes sense. Ideally, it should be shorter rather than longer. And you also want it to be something that you think is searchable and something that people can easily remember. And then obviously making sure that URL hasn't already been taken by somebody else. Building the bare bones content, so to speak. So most blogs have like an about page, a contact form, a page that has the mission statement, a page that has information about the team members, etc. So you definitely want to build those things first before you build the actual content of the blog. So that people who are visiting you know who you are and what you're doing and can get more insight into some of the background. Creating graphics or hiring a web designer, you definitely want to think about how high-tech you would like your blog to be. If you want it to be a really professional editorial site, you'll probably want to think about hiring someone. If you're fine with something that's a little bit more low budget, just using WordPress themes that are free, that can totally work too. So you definitely want to think about all of that stuff in terms of how your website's going to look. Also, there's tons of tools out there that you can use to create your own logos and things like that, and I would definitely suggest having one. Connecting and following other blogs. So before you get started, definitely follow some people's work. You might even want to get social media profiles going and just start kind of sharing other bloggers' work, and then people might start to see you and wonder what you're going to be blogging about, and even reaching out to people you admire and even asking for advice. A lot of times people will really be flattered that you're doing that, and it's a great way to make connections. I already kind of mentioned promoting it on social media. And then finally, get writing. You definitely have to be writing in order to start your blog, and I would definitely say having some posts built up before you start is great, because then you don't have to worry about running out of content and things like that. Next slide. All right, so for part 2 of the webinar, we're going to be talking and focusing on content. So you can kind of see there, that's sort of the ideal, perfect blog post, if you will, of things that a blog should have in it, ideally. And again, this is all going to be saved, so I won't go over each piece, but definitely I would say look back at this if you want to examine it further. Next slide. All right, so we are going to be looking basically at all of the different types of blogs that I mentioned, and looking at each type a little bit more in depth, and also looking at an example so you can kind of see what this looks like in real time. So first we have op-eds. So I actually got a quote from Advocates for Youth, which is a really great youth sexual and reproductive health justice organization, to explain exactly what an op-ed is. So, quote, op-eds are articles which appear opposite of the editorial page of local, state, and national newspapers. They are written by local citizens, organization leaders, experts, lost my place there, or others who are knowledgeable about an issue. So obviously this is something that is a little bit more of a traditional definition, but for blogging, it's really the same thing in the same format. It's just online. So it's really some kind of an opinion-based piece that is usually shorter in nature and is written by someone that has knowledge about the issue in some way. But, again, it can be someone that's a citizen who has built up their own knowledge. It can be an expert, what have you. So just having some kind of an authority and a voice on whatever topic that you're doing. And, you can give yourself that own authority for sure. Next slide. Okay, so here's an example of an op-ed. So this is something I wrote, actually. I have my own blogging column on the Huffington Post. So this is an op-ed about Hillary Clinton. And so you can kind of get the idea that it's about some kind of an issue and you're sort of giving your opinion and perspective. And usually it's for some kind of a newspaper-esque website, not necessarily, but even like an online magazine or something that has some sort of integrity, if you will. So this is just kind of an example of like what an op-ed is, but I mean it really can just be anything that is based on your opinion and perspective. Next slide. All right, so the next one is a personal narrative or essay. So this is something that is going to be very highly personal. So unlike the op-ed, this is always going to come directly from your own experience. And a lot of times it won't necessarily contain the same sorts of factual information and citations that an op-ed will. It's definitely all focused on you and your experience and you sharing your story about whatever it is. And then with that, they're obviously usually more autobiographical in nature. It's sort of like an excerpt of an autobiography, if you will, and is usually written in kind of a similar fashion. And then with personal narratives, it should usually ideally follow one of two purposes, so either to entertain or to teach. So lots of people will talk about their lives and their experiences in entertainment fashion, in the sense of they're trying to just make their audience laugh, which is more of an obvious example, but even just to interest people, that falls under the entertainment category. So talking about something that you've experienced that's interesting or that you think has insight or impact. And then teaching, I think, as an advocate, this comes a little bit more into play, since personal narratives as blog posts usually have some kind of message behind them. So a message and a takeaway from your story and how it relates to a wider issue, or why it makes such issue important, etc. So there's usually some kind of teaching aspect of like you can share your perspective and other people can learn from you. And identifying even like what that is, what that thing that you want people to learn from you in writing a personal narrative before you write it is a great way to do that. And then it is definitely a great blogging style for advocates because of that, and it definitely really puts, I think, a face behind your issue and what you're talking about. Since, as I mentioned in the beginning, a lot of times people will see, pieces that are more journalistically stylized and that have a lot of statistics and very sophisticated writing, and that definitely bring attention to issues but may not have the same kind of emotional impact that sharing a story can. So it definitely is a really great way to connect with people on issues and bring that really humanizing aspect to your work. Next slide. So the personal narrative example I chose is of the blog called Brittany herself. And Brittany is a comedian but also a body positive activist. And she started her blog because she wanted to really have an outlet for her comedic sense. And then she eventually started dabbling into body image posts and found that her audience really connected to what she had to say about that and her perspective. And so she kind of just kept going with it. And soon enough, she kind of turned into a body positive advocate and was someone who became really, and is now really recognized widely in the public, and actually just published a book recently called Fat Girl Walking. And it all started, though, because of writing on her blog. So it's also a good example of, like, how far your blogging can take you since things really don't have limits or ceilings on them. And then with that, I'm going to turn it over to Heather Arculeo, and she's going to talk about her experience.
Hello. As Olivia mentioned, I am co-chair for San Diego chapter of PWN, and I'm also a column writer for ANU Magazine, and my column is called A Woman's Voice, and my title was actually inspired by the Women's Retreat that happens here in San Diego, and how, basically how I became inspired to write was I love to read and I love to write. I love to hear other people's stories. And once I kind of had my own struggle, it inspired me to write about it because I had never read of someone else going through this, a similar struggle. And so that's what initially inspired me to start writing on, issues and women and HIV. And when I first started, one of my first pieces was with PWN, and I wrote a article or a blog on trauma and HIV and how my past trauma affected my HIV diagnosis. And from there, I was contacted by ANU Magazine to be a writer for them on women and HIV issues. And I immediately jumped on it, and one of the things that they asked of me was to write a mission statement on what I wanted my column to be about, what I wanted to portray, and what I wanted the outcome to be. And so my mission statement was to educate, advocate, and empower and inspire women to use their own voices on issues surrounding HIV and AIDS. And what that does for me is it sort of decides what I'm going to write about. The way I started writing was, using my personal story and tying it into issues that are currently happening. The very first column that I wrote was, why am I relevant? Who am I? And why should you even read my column? And that was more of a, get to know me. This is my story. And, this is why I'm relevant, because I'm a woman living with HIV, and I'm writing about that. And, after that, I just kind of slowly went through my own timeline of my life. Started with education in schools, how I, wasn't educated, and how what kind of education I did receive about it and how that affected me. And one of those, things was from when I went to AIDS Watch this year, talking about the comprehensive sex education and tying that into my own personal story. And so I basically went in that timeline of, after that it was trauma and how trauma affected my diagnosis and so on and so on. And so each time I tied something personal of my own life story, and if not myself, someone else's personal story, to an issue. And by doing that, I felt like I was able to capture the audience more on a personal level, as well as, making sure that I was following my mission statement, which was to educate and advocate and empower and inspire women to do something and to make change and to use their own voices to do the same. My experience so far has been amazing. I've, reached people all around the world, and, the whole purpose of it was because I wanted to get my voice heard, not just for me, but for other women who are unable to tell their stories. There's very, few women who will tell their personal lives and discuss personal things, and that's unfortunate because I think that's needed. It is needed out there because women like me, when I first started out, didn't have those outlets or didn't have anywhere to really go to hear those stories, and didn't really know that these issues were occurring with women in HIV. And so that's what really inspired me to continue to write and to use my own personal story. And originally I thought about, disclosure and how the disclosure piece, how using my own personal story would affect my family. And so when I first started writing, I used my first name and my initial of my last name, which was just Heather A, because I knew that if anybody Googled my name or Heather A, millions of other things were going to pop up, and that would probably not be one of them. And I was more concerned because I had, middle school age children, and they Google a lot. And at that point, I didn't really want them to know some of the personal things that I was going through and that I was writing about. So I had used that Heather A initially. Now, being a writer for ANU Magazine, and now that they are more educated on HIV and things, they now know most of my story, and they read my magazine, and my oldest shares my magazine with, others. And so I'm not so much as fearful of using my name, but I do go through my family after I write something to make sure that it's okay with them. With my husband, is it okay that I use this? Is it okay that I say these things? Because ultimately, I'm not the only one having to, I guess, deal with maybe consequences that may come from this, but so will my family. So that it's important to hear their ideas and their thoughts and what they feel should be included and not included. One of the things that I wish I would have known before I started writing is how hard it really is to come up with something to write about. Even though you are passionate and you have these personal stories, it's still difficult to come up with something. And for me, you have to have a certain amount of words, and so to come up with something and make sure that it's within that time, within that word count can be difficult, because sometimes you have a lot more to say than you can say, and sometimes you have not as much to say about the issue. So I think that that's one of the things that I wish I would have known prior to. Maybe I would have been able to organize myself a little bit more. But so that's a little bit about me and what I do and my experience with writing.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Heather, for sharing your experience in especially personal narrative writing. And I think it was very, very valuable. So thank you so much for being here. And I think we're ready for the next slide. Yes. So the final type of content that we will be discussing is reporting. So this is definitely more of a typical and traditional journalistic style of writing. So you might see this kind of blogging on something like CNN.com or Time.com or something like that. Definitely there's a huge focus on news items, current events, reports on the latest scientific research and things like that. They still, even though their blog posts use traditional journalistic styling tactics. So, for example, you might have heard about like the inverted pyramid, which is how journalists write. So you put the most important information at the top and then goes down from there. And it's kind of the same way And usually you'll see this in a headline and a subheadline that explains exactly what the story is about and the gist and the takeaway, and then you get into more of the technical details as you go on. So it uses those journalistic techniques in a blogging style so that it's easy to read and might not feel as necessarily stuffy or even long as a newspaper article, but still uses that like journalistic integrity and those skills. And it can be seen as pieces that are more hard news, in quote unquote, but they're often written in very short, easy to understand ways. I find that blog posts that go under the reporting headline are normally maybe between 300 and 800 words, so they're not super lengthy, and often also used to publish research, so to talk about new studies and things like that, and to interview experts and to get little bite-sized pieces from them so people can understand what's going on in the world. Next slide. So this is a reporting example. I mentioned time, and so here's a really good example of what a blog post would look like. So you can kind of see how the headline has kind of the gist of the article. So saying, like, you should ask for a higher salary if you have a job offer. And then it goes in to explain the actual study from the report that is from the University of Idaho. So it talks about their methodology and get some quotes from the study's authors and things like that. So it's a good example of what reporting looks like when it's put into a blogging style form. Next slide. Okay, so for our final piece, we're going to be talking about alternative angles, and so things that for bloggers who are already kind of been in the game for a little bit, this might be a more valuable piece for you. We're going to be talking about some other things to think about besides the actual writing process and the content creation that are really important for blogs to be successful and to really establish yourself as a household name and as a platform. Next slide. All right, so the first thing is SEO, which stands for Search Engine Optimization. So the little graphic on the side kind of describes what that means. So it's basically how much and often your blog is showing up in search results, since many people find new blogs through Google searches and search engines and things of that nature. So if you have good SEO, it means you're optimized and you're coming up in the top results and things like that. So I'm going to give you not really a tutorial on SEO, since that could be a whole nother webinar, but just some tips as to how to optimize your blog so that it's coming up in Google and that it's searchable. So putting in lots of links, and the more links you put in, the more searchable you'll be, since those links, when people search for stories with the links to the stories that are in your post, you'll come up as like a suggestion or as a relevant story that they might want to look at. Or even in Google News, they tend to organize things that talk about like the same research. So if you're linking that study, they'll put you with all of those other blog posts, so you'll get definitely some optimization that way. And then this is kind of interesting, but most people will link the source instead of the keywords. And the next slide, I'll show you exactly what that means. But basically, you want to link something that's searchable. So if you are getting a quote from Rolling Stone magazine, let's say, most people might link Rolling Stone magazine because they want to link the source, but linking something like Nicki Minaj told Rolling Stone magazine, because then you're linking, somebody might search like, ooh, I want to look at this interview Nicki Minaj did with Rolling Stone. So when they Google that, then your story will come up. Does that make sense? And again, the next slide we'll look at examples of that. Using tags. Some blogging platforms allow you to tag your posts, and definitely do this if you can, because those tags are things that people search for within that platform, and you want to come up in those searches. So definitely use tags if you can. And then titles being friendly is definitely something important. You don't want to have a title that's super long and complex that people are not going to be drawn to that. You definitely want to do something that's friendly and approachable and also kind of intrigues the audience into reading your post. So whether that's a question, whether you're putting some kind of like teaser into the headline, or even like giving the answer, kind of like the Time reporting piece does, of like, here's the gist of what I'm about to say in 500 more words. And some examples are like having listicles. So something like 5 ways to blog as an advocate, that would be like a listicle. And it kind of says right there what you're talking about. And asking questions, that can be a great way. Having some kind of little teaser. So like, what is the best way to blog as an advocate? Like, here are some examples, or, you know, something like that kind of gets people interested. Like, oh, I wonder what those techniques are, and now I'm going to read on. And then finally, writing in a Google byline and title that is searchable. So, for example, WordPress on the back end allows you to do this. So it allows you to basically manipulate how you're going to appear in Google, which is fantastic. So if you can do this, definitely take the time to do it if said platform allows you to. And you should be able to see that in the back end, and WordPress definitely does allow it. Next slide. Okay, so here's a couple of SEO examples. So looking at titles. All right, so the SEO-friendly title, if you want to write a post about best practices for organizing your desk. So 5 easy ways to organize your desk. That's very searchable. That's something people are probably going to be searching for, like easy ways to organize a desk. And then, you know, you'll come up. And also it's very straightforward and also has that listicle aspect. Something that would be not SEO friendly in the same category would be, here's how you can organize your desk. Since it's a little bit vague and doesn't have, it might work if that was the subtitle and there was a title before that, but because it is just like, here's how, and doesn't really have any kind of interesting angle to it, it's not something that is going to be very search engine friendly. And then in terms of links, so the link is obviously the bright blue. So an SEO friendly way to link back to a post the Positive Women's Network has on their blog would be linking the words women living with HIV, since that's something people will be searching for on Google. Not SEO friendly would be actually linking Positive Women's Network by itself, since not as many people will probably search for that. So that's just some examples so you can kind of see exactly what is SEO friendly and what is not. Next slide. All right, so pitching to other outlets. So we're just going to briefly talk about if you want to guest blog or write for another blog instead of making your own, kind of some best practices for doing that. So first you want to decipher what publication would be best for your content, because definitely there's different publications that serve different audiences. So for example, let's say you want to publish an op-ed on reproductive health. RH Reality Check would be a really good fit for that because they focus on reproductive health issues. And something that might not be a good fit for that would be something like a smaller blog that focuses on like very specific aspects of sexual health that isn't as broad and won't have as large of a reach. So definitely you want to like figure out what am I talking about and who would be a good place for this to be published on. Finding the appropriate editor and sending an email with your pitch topic in the subject line. I've even made this mistake. You definitely want to put your pitch topic in the subject line because lots of editors receive hundreds of pitches a day. And that's like a really simple mistake to make. And then also make sure to find the appropriate editor just because you want to make sure it's for the right section. Otherwise, they might not even bother to read your email because it's not applicable to the work that they're specifically doing. So figuring out, and that's more for larger publications, but make sure to figure out who you should be contacting when it comes to pitching. And definitely also wait for a response. It can be really tempting if you have a great idea and you really want to write about it and it's something that's really timely to pitch to as many outlets as you can and have some ways, someone's bound to want to pick up your story, right? The problem with that is that most outlets actually frown upon you pitching a story you pitch to them to somebody else, and it can take sometimes up for a week for them to actually review all the pitches they get. So even if you didn't get an answer in 2 days, they might have not even had a chance to look over your story. And the problem with that is that multiple people could also then pick up your story when there's conflicting policies in terms of usually when you're pitching and writing a story directly, you can only be doing that through one publication. With that story, you can't be doing it to more than one at one time. So definitely wait for a response. Most editors will give you some sort of response. So definitely don't go and pitch it to like 20 different people. Wait for a response. And that's why you should definitely be very targeted in who you're picking to pitch to. And then another tip is to write a press release. Press releases are awesome. You can literally just send them to even writers and journalists. I get press releases sent to me all the time because it's just a very easy way to pitch whatever topic you're talking about. And even if you're not the appropriate writer for it, a lot of times writers are really looking for stories like yours. So putting it in a press release form is just a very easy way to kind of get your message out even further in pitching to others. Next slide. So guest posting. So many blogs invite contributors to post something as like a one-time feature. And so in doing this, you definitely want to determine what your goals are. Like, why are you going to blog for someone else? Is it to get more exposure for your own site? Is it because you want to establish a working relationship with that person? You definitely want to figure out what your goals are and figuring out how you also can add value. Because when you're asking someone if you can blog for them, they need to have a reason to say yes. So you definitely want to, show this is what you can add and this is what you can contribute to their blog to make it even better. And then always do your research before proposing a guest post. Make sure you know something about the blogger. Make sure you understand what the blog is about and the type of content they publish. You definitely want to make sure you know what you're getting into and not just like find someone off a Google search and glance at their blog for 30 seconds and then ask if you can write a guest post. You definitely want to do a little bit more thorough research when you're thinking about doing this. And then also finding a common link between you and the blog or the blogger that you're asking to do a guest post for. So finding that common thread that connects you, and that often will then lead them to see why it makes sense to have you write a guest post, especially if you're doing it as kind of a cold pitch. Next slide. Social media integration. So social media is definitely an important part of blogging strategy. And having active accounts will get you the best engagement since they're so closely linked together. Now, this is something to think about. You have to think about if you want to use your own personal social media accounts as the same social media accounts you're using for your blog, or if you want to start blog-specific accounts. So like PWN USA has their own Twitter and Facebook, for example. So there are pros and cons to each, and you want to figure out how personally connected you want to be to your blog. Always share your work with all your social media networks. So don't be shy about self-promotion. Definitely share far and wide the work that you're doing and get it on as many platforms as possible. And then finally, use social media and engage with other bloggers. So if there's somebody you want to guest post for or pitch for or what have you, definitely use social media to do that. That's a really great way to get connected with other bloggers and, sharing their work too and, giving them a shout out is another great way for them to notice you, because you're giving them some love on your social media. Next slide. So finally, some suggested resources that you might want to look at. So if you want to find guest posting opportunities, that URL right there at BuzzBlogger has 500 sites that allow for guest pitches, so definitely look at that. ProBlogger.net they have so many resources, especially for people getting started in blogging. They have everything you could ever ask for in terms of resources, so definitely they're a great one. Basically, the encyclopedia of blogging resources is at theblogstylist.com/tools. They've built up an entire encyclopedia that's organized alphabetically, which is great. It has a lot of really great content. And then also Google, definitely Google searching for things is a great way. There's so many blogs that are even dedicated to how to start a blog. So there's many resources you can use just by searching. Next slide. So go forth and blog. I'm so excited for you all, and I hope you are really inspired to start blogging or keep blogging if you already are. That's some of my personal contact information if you're interested in following up with me, and then also PWN's social media and contact information. Definitely make sure you're following them, and I would love to open it up for some questions.
Yeah, just a reminder that you can come off mute by hitting star and 6 on your phone if you want to ask a question of Erin or Heather. Heather, I believe you're still here on the line to potentially answer some questions as they come in.
Yes.
Hi, this is Andrea Johnson from Philadelphia. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Andrea. Welcome.
Hi, I apologize. I came on late, so I hope this is going to be on the slides are going to be given out later. But I will definitely need some help because I just reached out to Essence Magazine in regards to becoming a blogger for them, and I needed to see how best I can present my ideals to them. So I would love to talk to somebody in regards to that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andrea. We can connect. I can connect you with Erin afterwards. Thank you so much. That's amazing.
Yeah, definitely. That's really awesome. And definitely love to connect further afterwards.
That's great. Thank you so much, Andrea. And I know that you have experience writing and you've got experience with media and radio and all, and it's really excellent to hear you're taking your writing to this next level and thinking about that. So, yeah, let's definitely connect about it.
Hi, I'm Tana with Houston. This is my first time calling, and this is so interesting. I'm trying to get my story out.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And what was your name? Did you want to share your name? I didn't hear that.
My name is Tana.
Tana?
Yes, Tana.
Tana. All right. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for coming and sharing your feedback. It's always nice to hear that it was interesting and had added some value. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Anyone else want to come off mute? Just hit star 6 on your phone. We'll give folks a few more seconds. And while we're waiting for anybody else who wants to come off mute to ask a question, I want to give a heads up, and I'll put this in the chat box too. You will receive, if you were registered for this webinar, you'll receive a survey via email to evaluate this webinar. Please fill it out so that we can improve our educational opportunities. It's really, really vital to get your perspectives on these opportunities. So we'll be sending that out after the webinar. So stay tuned. Stay tuned for to get the survey, and you will get reminders as well. But please definitely fill it out as soon after you get it. Any other questions?
Olivia, this is Tammy. I don't have a question. I guess I do. Is one asking Erin and Heather, do they normally journal every day, or how do they really start? Because like I said, when I typed in the chat boxes, that my problem is one is making myself down to write, and then when I do write, I can write a page-long sentence. How long do I want to have you?
Oh, Tammy, you're breaking up a little bit. I heard the beginning part, but you cut out a little. Hello?
Well, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes,
so,
I can hear you now.
In and out.
Out. Yeah, you're cutting in and out a little bit. But I think I heard you say that you were asking if Erin and Heather journal at all, because sometimes it's hard to get to sit down and sort of make yourself write or carve out the space to write or the ideas to write?
Mm-hmm. So I personally don't journal every day or even necessarily write every day, but I do probably write like close to every day just with all of my different writing obligations that I have. But I think for me something that's really helpful is I make a list of topics that I want to talk about or that I think are interesting and that would make a good blog post. So instead of like thinking like let's sit down and think of like what to write about and come up with an idea, like I keep a list of ideas so that if I'm not inspired I can just look at the list and then be like, oh, I have like 10 things I want to talk about. And then just like picking something off of that. So I think like keeping a list or keeping like a running journal of topic ideas and inspiration is something that hopefully can get you like motivated to write and help with that process.
And I do exactly the same thing as you, Erin. I literally have like a notepad that I keep all my thoughts and ideas in that I when something pops into my mind or an issue that's come out or anything like that sparks an interest in me and something that I feel I could tie in to women and HIV issues, then I write it down and write little blurbs about like, what the content would be, a little bit about on each of those ideas. So, and it's really whenever anything just randomly pops into my head. Sometimes I use my phone when I'm driving and I record myself because for some reason when I'm driving, that's when my thoughts come a lot more clear. And so I just record my voice talking about whatever it is that is inspiring me at that moment.
Awesome. That is really great. And I even love the idea of recording yourself and like saving that and then using that later. So yeah, definitely I would say keep up doing that. And Heather, did you have anything to add to that?
No, that was just what I do.
Oh, that was you, Heather. I'm sorry. I was thinking that was who asked the question.
No,
my apologies.
Oh, hello?
Hello?
Hi. Sorry, I think the sound cut out just generally a little bit. Everyone still there? I know we're probably going to wrap up in a couple of minutes, but is everyone still there whose voice was on the call before?
Yes.
Yep, okay. Phew, there you are, okay.
Oh, no.
Oh, hello? Are there any other questions? I think we've got a few people off mute right now at the same time. You hit *6, which is why we've got a little bit of background noise going on. Any final questions or final comments from Erin and Heather?
This is Heather. I just wanted to let everybody know that if anybody has any questions or even thoughts or ideas on that they would like to write about or discuss, I'm open and free to speak to them whenever.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for being available in that way. And folks know where to find you, too. As the co-chair of San Diego.
This is Andrea Johnson in Philadelphia again. Thank you so much, Heather and Erin, for coming on, because I was just, when I saw this session here, I was like, oh, this is great, because it's going to be able to empower me to know, although I know how to write and do different things, just knowing, like, some of the shortcuts to blogging and different things of that nature helps me. So I really do look forward to speaking with you ladies, and and also you too, to get more information and guidance in regards to, helping to write really good blog articles for, if it all goes well and I'm accepted with Ethics. So I'm looking forward to speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Andrea. Thank you to everyone for being here. And thank you, Andrea, for that comment too. And again, really exciting that you've got really amazing plans for your writing potentially going forward. Any comments, questions, final thoughts? I don't want to miss anyone. Give folks about 5 more seconds to come off mute or say what they'd like to say. Any final thoughts, Erin or Heather? I know that Heather, you'd given some final comments yourself, but any final thoughts?
I just want to thank everyone so much for coming today. I know I and Olivia and Heather really appreciate you taking time out of your day to attend the webinar, and definitely please fill out the survey. And thank you all so much for your participation and engagement.
Indeed. All right, with that, I'm going to close this webinar. Thank you again so much. It's been a pleasure being here. It's been a pleasure to see you. Absolutely. Take good care, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
too. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.